You're listening to the Modern Saxophonist Podcast.
Welcome to the Modern Saxophonist Podcast. I'm your host, Mark MacArthur, and today we get to talk a little bit of sax repair, geeking out with Stephen Georges. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Mark. How are you doing?
Good. I gotta throw it to you. You contacted me off of my open invite to hear suggestions for episodes that our audience might be interested in, and you threw me a good one right off the bat here, and so I really appreciate you reaching out, and folks, this is what happens when you present a good idea. I just kind of roll with it, and and so hopefully we're going to have a nice spirited discussion of something that all of us have an intense passion and an interest to gain more awareness and to an appreciation for, which is the just how to. Well, I guess we're going to talk about how to communicate with your repairman, how to basically what to look for and find a good one, because we're always in need of knowing how to do that, and then also maybe some tips and tricks and that Stephen's got for us, and I may throw a few bones in myself. Hopefully they do work. So, all right, Stephen. Before we get started, this is way more important, I think, is I'd like to know a little bit more about you, and I think our audience would too. So do you mind telling us, first of all, I mean, you're a saxophonist, so do you mind telling us where you studied, kind of some of your background, and then maybe why you got into instrument repair?
Sure. That's a little bit of a long-winded question, but happy to go through it. So
you bet.
I'm from the Indianapolis area. Grew up about an hour south of Indianapolis, and went to University of Indianapolis for my undergrad. Studied with first Harry Miedema, who's a great jazz saxophonist and pedagogist, and he's just fantastic. Can't say enough good things about him. Miss him dearly because he retired to Florida. And then halfway through my undergrad, Scotty Stepp, who's got a pretty long pedigree as well, came to University of Indianapolis and really taught us what it meant to be a classical saxophonist. And cause I had no idea, you know, Harry's got mainly a jazz background and studied with Rousseau at IU just to kind of get out of the Army kind of thing. But then, so Scotty, really hit us with fire and brimstone about classical saxophone, and I took to it pretty well. And came time to graduate, and I was getting a music ed degree. I'm thinking, well, do I really want to go teach, or do I want to go to get a master's? And so I had the opportunity to go to graduate school, and I went to graduate school and studied with Dr. Paul Bro at ISU, Indiana State University. Yeah, he's doing well and still teaching. He's been the director of the School of Music out there for the past couple of years. He's doing real well, doing a lot of cool things.
That's a great step up. That is a great step up.
He's doing real well, and so I finished my 2.5 years there and got into instrument repair, and that kind of started in my undergrad. I met a bassoon teacher at University of Indianapolis, and he had used to repair instruments in Cincinnati when he was getting his master's and doctorate. And I said, hey, will you teach me how to repair instruments? Like, oh yeah, sure. Come up during the summer and we'll get going. So he gave me a list of things to buy, and I did, and I repatted my first saxophone that summer, going back and forth from my house to his house every week, and then learn how to do that and just kind of develop my craft from there. I will say that it's a hard road, and it requires a lot of self-reflection, a lot of seeking out wisdom from various sources. It's kind of what I did. So from studying with my teacher in undergrad at ISU, they employ an instrument repair technician full-time on staff. So she's just responsible for maintaining instruments, and told her my interests. And she's like, okay, well, take my class. She teaches one mandatory class for education majors. And then let's do some private lessons kind of thing. So I did that and learned a lot from her, had a lot of positive things to say about her. She's just wonderful. And if you're going to do this, the more traditional route for instrument repair is to go to a trade school, such as Red Wing in Minnesota or Western Iowa Tech, and now there's Renton in Washington, and there's another one in Colorado, Seomint.
Okay.
I think it's how you pronounce it. And you go learn everything about instrument repair in about 2 years, and you don't really get to spend a lot of time on one. There are some benefits and some non-benefits from it, but we won't talk about that. We don't need to, at least.
Right.
So mine is basically apprentice-based, and I feel that was most appropriate for me. So I got to do my studies of classical saxophone, and then I got to repair instruments for the studio, either studio I was in, off and on, and get a lot of feedback. And I feel that is so important for us as repair technicians, is to receive the feedback from those who we fix instruments for. That is one of the most leading contributors to how I've developed my style of repair, the way I approach things. And it's really nice to work with an individual who really demands more from you because they demand so much from their instrument.
Right. Right. And that is, when you're talking about a particular sound or a particular way of playing, my saxophones do need to respond in a very particular way. Right. And I'm used to it. I definitely know what I like. And when it's out of a whack, I am not a happy camper until it's kind of like I kind of feel like that Brett in the corner that's just screaming and kicking and going, fix my horn. And and it really isn't that way. It's just kind of, you sit there and you go, well, when you know what you need in order to perform accurately, a lot of times it's from a performer's perspective, you need to have the machinery operating at optimum level, because it can't be because of the horn.
Mm-hmm. Right. The horn can't get in your way.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you use the word optimal. When I took this class at ISU, it was mainly geared towards music educators learning a little bit of the basic terminology of repair technicians so they can better communicate with whomever serves their school or serves their personal instrument.
Right.
And optimum was a big word. At least it was for me. Because you hear good playing condition from repair technicians, and they put it in good playing condition, but good playing condition is not optimum playing condition most of the times.
Right.
So it's that difference between 90 and 100%. And it's been my experience. Sometimes you say good playing condition, it's 90%. It plays to the average middle schooler. They really can't tell the difference between those 10%.
Right.
And I found that only really dedicated or semi-dedicated students who practice a lot and they practice their instrument a lot can really tell the difference in that extra 10%.
That's right.
There are a number of students that I've worked for at IU, Indiana University, who, if I've repadded their instrument, they really, really demand that 100%, and they can tell the difference between 99.5% and that 100%. And it's and it helps me grow as a repair technician to try to achieve that for them, and to go back and forth like, oh, this isn't responding really well, or this could you adjust this just a little bit, and see if what that does for me. So you adjust it just a smidge or whatever they ask you to do, and instantly it opens up for them. Okay, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Thank you so much. And to them, that's worth their weight. It's worth more than they can probably pay to them. Right.
And so in that line, I mean, right there, we're talking about fine tuning. I mean, especially for the professional musician, and those aspiring to be, you're really talking right there. In order to get that kind of feel, you actually have to sit down with somebody and know their playing. You have to actually see what they're talking about. Entering in at a pianissimo on a low B flat. A middle schooler's not going to be asked to do that.
Right.
But quite often we are, and if not the low B flat, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so that means that the seal, the the reaction of the keys, or even the dexterity of the springs, and it always drives me crazy when one spring is looser than another, and you're getting a different feel for one finger than the other, and then some guys like that because one finger's stronger than the other.
Exactly.
And so you sit there and you go like, all right, so I had one guy adjust my G sharp key to the point where it was just so light, the touch, and I like just kind of placing my finger on the key, like knowing it's there, but I don't like it to go down. So every single time I placed it, it would open up the G sharp key. I'm like, okay, this is not going to work for me.
Right.
And it may work perfectly for him because he never sets his pinky finger on the G sharp key. And some people are, like right now, I think anybody can tell that I know, it's like when you know your horn and you know what you like, you may not even know why you like it that way, but if it works for you, that's why you have to really focus on that being tuned up in the particular way. So, do you happen to have now? Part of this comes from relationship and your ability to communicate these things. Now, I've had repairmen in which known and trusted, and then they move. And they get hired in some other city, and they go, and then you have to find somebody else, and a lot of times that's a painful process. And then you ask somebody, hey, well, go ahead and send it to this guy in New York. I live in Las Vegas. Why would I send it to a guy in New York to do something that I know I'm going to need to play? I don't feel like buying a plane ticket and going to New York and standing there next to him unless I absolutely have to. So what's your advice?
Well, going back to our previous discussion of feedback, I think of it more as the player, you're demanding more from your repair technician. Not telling them to their face, oh, I need more from you, give it to me now. But saying, okay, well, I've tried it. You fixed it for me a week ago. I've had a week to really play on it. Here are a couple things I'd like to change. And see how receptive they are. Because in my experience, some repair technicians, myself included, are very sensitive to their work. Anytime I hear that someone comes back with a redo or something, I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? Oh, it must be their fault. It can't be my fault. Which, in turn, it could be my fault, and I will most likely own up to it.
Right.
So my advice to you, or to anyone really, is to talk to the repair technician. Go up to the store or whomever's house, whomever, and just say, hey, I really need to get my saxophone adjusted or tweaked. It's not performing like it used to, and I'm really sad about it. What can you do? What kind of pads do you use? Because if you're anything like me, I can talk about equipment, pads, resonators, glues, till I'm blue in the face, and love it, every minute of it. But talk to them. Say, hey, how would you approach this? Usually a good reputable shop will evaluate your instrument if they've got time when you're there. Say, I'm really having trouble with my low D. It's really stuffy. What can you do for me? They take your instrument, they give it the once-over, say, okay, you've got leak here. I think your low C is a little bit too low. That's probably the main reason why you're complaining, but you probably have some other leaks. Let's adjust it all. Let's open your low C. Let's see where we're at then. Because if I play test it, it's going to be different than how, let's say, Mark, you play.
Right.
I'm sure we don't play very, very similarly. We might. I've never heard you play. I'm sorry.
It's all good. And that's the whole point. It's just kind of
exactly.
like every single player is going to be a little bit different. And I mean, come on, like that's the beautiful part about saxophone, isn't it? It's the fact that even though we try to sound like a model or whatever it is, we still always end up seeming to find a way to sound like us.
Right. So then after they adjust it, I would see if they would invite you to spend some time to play it for them, whether it be in a store setting or in their home. Play the instrument, really put it through its paces, really test the quality of your work or the quality of the saxophone, and see what can be done after that. I can't tell you how many times I've repadded an instrument for an individual, pro, student, whomever, and I say, when you come back and pick it up, please plan to spend 10, 15 minutes really playing the instrument, see how it feels for you. Most of them, especially the younger students, are like, oh my gosh, this is so different, but it's so great, thank you so much. And some pros will be like, okay, this is better, however, can we get more out of this? Or name the issue they want more out of. And then we spend some time and we work on it. And usually we get there, unless it's, a physical limitation of the reed, the mouthpiece, but that's a whole other discussion.
Wow. I mean, yeah, and that, that's where I like what you said is that you went and play tested it for a week and you bring it back. Mm-hmm. Like maybe even an initial reaction, unless there's no way that it's going to work. Right?
Right.
Like there's just no way that particular repair has there's just something that got missed and you got to take care of it. If everything seems in order and then you take it away, spend a week, bring it back, communicate with them. Usually everybody guarantees their work and is perfectly happy. And most everybody's perfectly happy making a few adjustments and tweaks in my experience. I have run across a couple times where the repair tech didn't necessarily, it wasn't in their scope to do some of the things that I was requesting. But I've usually only found that in my personal work with these techs, you have to I guess here's the point. You have to ask questions and you've got to be blunt about it. You can't just go, well, that's nice. And well, I kind of like it. And
that's good enough.
That's good enough. And there is, and by the way, they are very busy people, right? You guys are slam busy. This is the time of year where I should not be very slammed, but I'm very slammed right now. So I've been established in Indianapolis as a repair tech for about 2.5 years and nicely growing a following and that's kind of growing a little bit. And so I've got more and more people bringing me work. Like just this year alone, I've had 4 soprano sax repads. Those have got to be fun.
They're not as bad as like a baritone sax, which I have next, but 4 soprano sax repads in the beginning of the year, and it's unheard of. And it's just, kind of stars aligned. They needed to get it done. But regardless, this should not be my busy season, but it is. And some other techs, they're always busy. There are a handful of techs who just they work at home. They do like the custom overhauls, and they've got to wait list months in advance.
Right.
So it just depends on what tech and where they're located, what kind of environment. Because there's a difference between techs that work at a store or some kind of facility and then those who work at home and really dedicate a lot of time to every single instrument. Right.
Mm-hmm. And so that where I was going with that is everybody's got some busyness, and they will be glad to just go, okay, you're fine with it, I'm fine with it, have a good day.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's where knowing the quality and know when to press in. But I also want to throw out everybody. I've run across several people who do not use the best manners. Nor the best use of the English language. Or hey, if you're in another country, because we got a lot of listeners from all over the world, even in another language, I'm sure they're doing the same things that happen because we're all human beings, and some people have not been nice that I've noticed when we've come in, and I've even gotten a call from a couple repairmen going, "Hey, do you know what your student just said to me?"
Oh my gosh!
Wow. Those are the phone calls that I do not like getting, and those aren't the things I like seeing because here's the point, folks. When we are communicating, if you happen to be a high velocity performer. You are somebody that got to get it done now. And these are repair techs that go, well, you need me right now, and I certainly could use your business, but I would be glad to refuse your business if you do not, if it crosses a line. And I've thought about that a few times when I've been in those situations. I always see the grace that some of these repair guys have, but I got a huge heart for repair guys because they've always spoken. I mean, I've learned a ton just standing next to them. One of my favorites was when I was growing up in Tampa Bay, Florida. Mr. Kutro, he had a shop and he did all the repairs. And whenever I needed something done, I'd travel across the Howard Franklin Bridge, take it to Mr. Kutro, and always seemed to be not only was there some type of massive improvement in my horn, but there was also a free lesson or something on how to do things better, or just some good old advice that always came as a result. And I think part of it was my mom made sure I was a nice person. So I'm encouraging everybody out there to be very professional.
I'm glad you said that, Mark. Thank you. I appreciate that kind of respect.
Well,
because you're right. There are some people who just come in and they're just angry that their instrument doesn't work. They had it in a year ago. Why doesn't it work now? Kind of thing. And it's unfortunate your horn doesn't work after a year, but you've also been playing the dickens out of it for a year.
Right.
There are professionals that just play the leather off their pads. They're like, why doesn't it work? I'm like, because your leather's gone.
Right.
So
and part of it's interesting. I mean, it all speaks to style of play. I mean, some people grip too hard or too much, or they just eat a bunch of candy bars before they play, and then stuff happens.
They don't maintain their instrument.
Right. So here's let's actually kind of get into something now. Is that walking through? Can you walk through some general things that happen in our saxophones that generally break down, that we can look out for, so that we know our sax is out of tune? Because what I've found with my saxophone is that it's kind of like the frog in the water. Okay, you put a frog in hot water, he's going to bounce out. But you put him in cool water and you turn that burner on, it just keeps on getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And it's just like you don't even know, you're not even aware. It's something that builds up over time. And so you just get, as it's going, you get more and more used to the out of tuneness or things are out of adjustment.
Okay, I think I know where we're going with this.
Good.
Okay, so a couple of the things that I commonly see in performers that play their instrument a lot are they're not swabbing out their instrument. I know it's very small, but that takes your instrument so much farther. The pad life, for very specifically the E-flat pad. In most of our cases, if you don't swab your instrument, when you put your instrument away in the cases, all the moisture collects on that E-flat pad. And if you get gunk accumulating on that pad or the tone hole, it's going to affect the response of your low D and the lower notes below that. That's generally what I look for. Number 3 on the list is, okay, let me see your E-flat pad. And if you can look around it and you've got pinhole leaks all over the place because of gunk, it blows your response to the lower end of the instrument completely. So swab your instrument. I don't know if you have this in your part of the world, but you have seen those shove-its or those things on stick with the fluffy things. I'm not a fan of those personally, and this is just my personal opinion, because I think it keeps the moisture inside of the instrument. You're increasing the humidity inside the instrument, which thusly expands your pads. And if you don't have them on key clamps, it will pillow out your pads, and they're not going to seal very well if you're performing a lot. So I recommend to anyone just put the drag swab the little weighted thing. Just do it a couple times. Do it through the neck as well, so you don't get gunk accumulating in your neck. That's another thing, because if you have a saxophonist who gets sick often and they don't clean their neck, that could be very well a culprit. When I was in graduate school, there was the trombone professor hardly swabbed his trombone slide, and he was sick all semester, had his instrument cleaned, and all the nastiness that came out of was probably leading towards his sickness all the time.
Well, there you go.
Exactly. So, swab your instrument, saxophonist, please. Your repairman will thank you. Another thing that I commonly see is the G-sharp adjustment. So, for playing G-sharp, we have a key that opens up. And any right-hand note you play, F, E, or any of the sorts, will automatically close that note. Close that key, the G-sharp key. And that's done by a screw in perfect adjustment with everything else in your right hand. Now, let's say, for instance, you have a buzzing sound on, say, your low C sharp. I found to be the most prevalent note for this issue. If you get this nasty buzz in your low C sharp and you can't figure out why, it's probably because your G sharp's hanging open a little bit. So what I would do and check for is play your low C sharp, bring your thumb up from around the thumb hook, and try to tap on your G sharp key. If you can hear the noise or you hear it get instantly better, you just need to tighten down your G sharp screw a little bit. And that's something anyone can do, because you can always go back if you go too far with that adjustment.
That's right. And that's easy. That's an easy one. That's a great, easy fix. I mean, I can't tell you how many students I've had that's there going, my saxophone doesn't work. And I'm like, let me look at it. Yep, that G-sharp key was wide open and, had not been, probably never been adjusted. And there we go. We put it in. And by the way, most of it's because these students, they don't even take their instruments in to the shop to get it regulated. And so you get them in high school and they got that instrument when they were in 6th grade and it's never been in the shop. And then, next thing they're whining about a $300 repair and you go, well, if you had taken it in over time.
Right. I would say that, if you're a saxophonist, in high school, middle school, you can expect to take it in once a year for just general maintenance. And they might have to replace a pad or two, maybe a couple, depending on the acidity of your system and your body. But if you do that every year, you're going to get so much more out of your saxophone and so much more out of the pads of your saxophone. Pads are kind of like tires on a car. Yeah, they're going to need to be replaced eventually. It's just the nature of the instrument. But there are things you can do to prevent that actual time happening. For cars, it's rotating your tires and make sure it's all inflated correctly. But for saxophone, it's making sure you're swabbing your instrument. Scotty, my teacher in undergrad, would go so far as to brush his teeth before every time he plays his instrument. Keeps a toothbrush and toothpaste in his case and makes it a point to brush his teeth. And I tell you, he's got the cleanest pads of anyone I've ever seen. And he plays his horn, hours a day. It's amazing what just that little thing will do. I know it's a kind of a couple-minute inconvenience sometimes if you're running late to a rehearsal, but it's such an important thing, I think, is really clean out all the gunk in your mouth. You don't put it in your saxophone.
Yeah, because
get the most out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I love it when I go to the repairman and he's like, okay, I know you play this all the time, but how does it stay in such good shape? How in the world? And in a lot of ways, it's just I'm doing the same thing. I'm just making sure that if I have had anything in my mouth, I just go. I usually don't have the toothbrush, but I'm usually just swishing a little bit of water and getting things out before playing, and there it is. And also swabbing and doing exactly what you said. It's easy, man. I got to tell you, you do your routine maintenance and no big bills to speak of for a while, which is good.
And to go back to some more tips, along the same lines as the G sharp is your low C sharp key. So on the modern saxophones, I'm talking about modern Yamahas and Selmers and Yagasawas, and most modern saxophones nowadays from about 10, 15 years ago will have a C sharp adjustment screw on their low B key. That really affects the response of your low B, especially with your tilted spatula keys, your left-hand pinky table. It's got the little bar on the side of your low B flat. It's a tilted mechanism. So if you go from C sharp to low B flat, and it doesn't respond at all, it kind of chokes itself out, it's because that screw needs to be tightened down just a little bit. And usually, if you go too far in that screw, your low B won't respond at all because it keeps it from closing completely. And that's kind of the balance where you want to check for yourself. So just to recap, if you're having issues with going from low C sharp to low B flat, it's probably because your low C sharp key is being hung open. And there's a screw on your low B key to control the openness of that low C sharp key with the other with the low B flat, low B and low B keys, and you're actuating your low C sharp key. So you tighten it down until, me personally, I like to have it open just a smidgen, just a little sliver of light, because it's very hard to find that balance of, okay, I got to get this perfect. So you tighten down that screw, and then you see where you're at. You go back and forth to make sure it's just right for you. I mentioned that I like to have a little sliver of light because my feel, it might not be the same as someone else's feel who actually owns the horn. They might actually really crunch down on that low B key, and if you got that screw just right for you, it's probably not going to work for them. So I like to have it just a little bit out. And then that's one of those things where I check with people who come in and they've tried a horn after I've just got done adjusting it. That's something I have them do. Play your low C sharp to low B flat. Let's see if I've got that adjustment right. And if I don't, you just tweak it real quick and see where you're at.
I love it. Yeah, that's been one. You know, as another one is the BIS key. Mm-hmm. I find the BIS key tends to stay open, and for some reason, and here's where I find it. It's like transfers between longhorn and shorthorn, and that little bit of play, if it's open, tends in the transfer time. It just seems to like get a little blurb. And that you really shouldn't have. And some repairmen I've known, they leave the BIS key open from the right hand because most of us do not play 1-1 or right. 1-4 and 1-5 B flat. But man, I use that like crazy whenever I come up with something that I can use it for, because it's so, in some situations it's the fastest, it's the best, it's what it is. And so that BIS, and I've found it to be on modern horns in the exact same arm that the G sharp key screw is on.
So that adjustment arm you're referring to has two screws on it, one for the G sharp and one for the BIS key. Mm-hmm. Usually when you set your key heights, it's really important to get that BIS just right because it affects the actuation of your right-hand keys. Because if you have your BIS key open just a little bit, when you close your right-hand keys, you're going to get a little bit of a hiccup of that arm touching the BIS arm, and you're going to feel it if you're going slow or even if you're going fast. Mm-hmm. You're going to feel it, and it's going to be a little bit of a mental hiccup for you and just not feel right.
Right. And for me, that's probably what I was talking about, is that mental hitch that right. I just can't deal with. And so, and so with that, so we've got the G sharp closed, we've got the low B, B to C sharp, that little arm, and we've got the BIS. But now, if you do happen to have like an old con or an older instrument, are those adjustments as easy as that?
They are not, because they usually don't have the screw mechanism where you can really dial it in. It's usually just a bar sticking up from your lower stack bar key or the F sharp key that has a piece of adjustment material, cork, felt, whatever you want to put there. It usually has to close both at the same time, and you usually just adjust that bar to close the G sharp and adjust the arm of the BIS to close with that mechanism.
Right.
And that's a kind of a fine line.
And a lot of that is just, now we're dealing with cork, and now we're dealing with something that breaks down that could potentially, within the next 8 to 10 months, it could crunch up just enough to where it creates another leak. So, with that, I mean, and unless you know instrument repair and how to the fine tuning of getting a cork exactly right and shaving it down right, this is where you absolutely have to have a repairman.
Right, you do. And I would question anyone doing it themselves, because let's say you do have a vintage horn and your 1-in-1's not working, and it's because your bis key's not closing all the way because your cork's compressed on your G-sharp bis adjustment arm. The only way to really fix it is two ways: is to replace the cork, but then you got to do a whole bunch of other adjustments, or you could bend the arm of the bis that touches that adjustment arm. But then you can cause binding issues, and if that starts to bind, you got to take off the entire upper stack, left hand, and it's just a nightmare to fix if you go that route.
I really like that you went through that process because here's another thing that you said. You got to bend the arm, and you got to all. I mean, some of this is, how many times do people come into your shop that have purposely tried to fix something by bending a key or manipulating it from back to front and trying to just doing their own thing like that?
Well, I think it happens more often than I know of. I get a lot of school repairs, and I don't interact with the students, so I'm sure that happens a lot. But over-the-counter repairs, it doesn't happen as much as you think. The worst story of something like this happening is someone came in, brought in their alto sax, says, "Hey, I wanted to take it apart and clean it myself because I saw it on YouTube or something," and took it all apart, cleaned it, put it all back together, and he says, "Now it won't play very well." And pretty much everything leaked, and he didn't put together completely correctly, and it was kind of a mess. It wasn't something I couldn't handle. It's just a mess. And unfortunately, he did have to pay for my time to readjust everything, get everything just right, and get it going again.
Right.
He understood. It happens. It's just kind of one of those you live and you learn kind of things. He turned out to be a really good customer, and you move on.
Oh,
but
yeah.
You just move on. You kind of take your licks and you move on, kind of thing.
So I've got a question. This is actually a personal question.
Sure.
For me to I've run across texts that are like, I refuse. There is no way I'm going to bend a key. This is going to be I'm going to just adjust, obviously, seating the pad in a particular way. And then I've got some other guy, I've run across a couple others that are just pull out the pliers and tweak. So,
right.
So what's right in that?
Well, I think it goes more towards what is the tech comfortable doing.
Okay.
A long-winded answer of this is there are kind of two different thoughts. You don't bend anything; you try to keep it all original, or you bend what you have to because it's what you need to do, or that's what you know how to do. Being that they don't float pads, or they do float pads. The argument for not floating pads is you don't know what kind of adhesive's behind the pad all the time. Let's say you had someone fix your instrument, you don't know who, and they bring it to you and say, "Okay, well, I had this person fix it a year ago. I'm in town now. Can you fix my instrument?" And let's say I floated all my pads, and so, okay, great. I'm heating up the pads. I'm trying to pull all these leaks out, and nothing's sticking because they're using, let's say, an inferior glue that's not suitable for floating pads. Then you're not getting anywhere. You've wasted all this time. You're not getting anywhere. So then your only result is to start bending stuff, and that's not necessarily what the person wants to do. I think that if, as a saxophonist, if you're educated enough to know if what you want done, rather floating pads or not floating pads, or just shifting the pad cup to the tone hole, then you're looking at a pretty specialized repair. Something that I kind of wanted to mention on the show is some terminology discrepancies I've noticed. The difference between a repad and an overhaul. In my book, and what I've seen, is a repad is you take apart the instrument, you clean it, replace any kind of adjustment materials or bumpers that need to be. You put new pads in and you adjust it to how it needs to be adjusted. Whereas an overhaul in my book is a mechanical overhaul. So you take apart everything so meticulously, you straighten everything just perfectly, you make sure there's no slop on the keys laterally or longitudinally, and you control every variable of that saxophone. down to the smallest, zero point 0.1 millimeter of cork. You're controlling everything, and you in that kind of instance, you kind of rely more on the setup work or the body work or what have you, straightening everything, and that way you put the right size thickness pad with the right amount of shellac or whatever kind of adhesive you use. You put the pad in, and in a perfect world, it should just sit perfectly. Kind of like what your guest on a couple shows ago was talking about, the gravity closing the pad perfectly on the tone hole. That's kind of what you're achieving, and kind of the thing you can really get out of a good quality overhaul. Whereas a repad, you might have to bend the back of the pad cup down, or the front of the pad cup down, in order for the pad to close, because either you've chosen too thick of a pad, or there's previous damage to the key cup. And the difference between those kind of repairs is like a production shop, like a big store or a big chain of stores, that they're a matter of, let's get these things out. We need to get these going. It is faster to bring the front of the pad cup down. It is faster to bend some things sometimes. I think it is important for us as repair techs to be aware of either instance of floating or non-floating or bending, and be able to execute them how they see fit for the instrument. It's not necessarily every saxophone warrants an overhaul. Let's say, like mechanically refitting everything, straightening everything. Not everything warrants that. Let's say, Mark, you came into the shop, like, hey, man, I really need an E-flat pad. Can you do this for me real quick? I'm like, yeah, sure. Bring the pad, bring it over and get it all done. Let's say I'm out of, you use a really thin piece of pad. I don't have a thin one. I've got, it's the 0.160 thickness of pad. I'm getting real technical. That's all I've got, and it's still too thick. I still have to bend the back of your pad cup down in order for it to work really well. It's not the greatest thing, but it got you going because you needed it real quick.
Right.
Did I answer your question adequately?
That actually does. It's just kind of like one of those things where you just don't want to, it's kind of like, what do I get scared of? What do I not get scared of? Do I trust this person's doing this work? Right. These kind of things. And I think that's, for me, anytime I've seen somebody, get the bending out and that's their first one, I was just like, is that the way
do you really have to do that?
Do we really have to do that right now? Yeah. And so, but that's what and I've heard other repairmen that are just like, no, I'm just going to seat and we got to find the right place. But that, you're right. That does mean that they're going to have to, it could possibly affect other pads, other adjustments and everything else. Cause it's like, it's kind of funny. It's like a puzzle, right? It's like you adjust one thing here, and then it opens something up there, and
right.
or and it's just kind of like, and even on the intonation, like the key heights and how high the pads, the resonator pads are up, these kind of situations make for a really really interesting thing, isn't that? I've played on some saxophones with closer. The keys are closer to the body, or they're open, and it's just amazing the difference in response all around. And just
it definitely is. It's a matter of venting, how much air is moving out, how big the tone hole is compared to the pad. There are so many variables, and I'll say that not all the key heights are going to work for two horns. Let's say I have two of the same model professional horn in front of me. Same kind of players, they're both collegiate, working on their studies. But one horn might warrant a smaller key opening than the other, just based on how it is. Everything's exactly the same, pad protrusion, everything's the same, but one could be different than the other. It's just what it warrants. And it takes a lot to really to dial that in. It does take a player of some sort. My background of playing in my collegiate studies does lend a lot to really fine-tuning a horn, but I won't say it's completely necessary. There are bassoon repairmen who are still great saxophone repairmen because they're able to really listen. They play enough saxophone to really listen, to know when, okay, that's right. Okay, that's a little flat. Oh, that doesn't speak very well. They know what to do. They know how to fix it. And more importantly, they have enough respect for the instrument to really do the job it deserves.
Yes. And that, it's definitely not it's not a tell-all that the person is a saxophonist, or even like if you're a classical saxophonist, a classical saxophone person who's adjusting it. It's not necessary. But I like what you said. It's somebody who's listening, and somebody who's actually very intent on the awareness of some of the problem solving that's inherent in the repair work. Mm-hmm. Cool. So I was just thinking about this, and off the cuff, and I'm just kind of, do you mind if we go through some of the mechanism, talk about its functionality and things that you can do to manipulate it, or some other things, just in case? Because I was just thinking about let's start with the octave mechanism.
Sure.
Are there things that you can give us pointers on the octave mechanism, do's and don'ts, or some things that can keep it in alignment?
Sure. Always have your plug on when you're storing the instrument. That's a big thing. Like your little plug your in plug that goes in the instrument, because that could bend. Let's say you drop your instrument in the case, it could hit against the case, and you could bend your octave stem. And on some saxophones, when you try to bend that back, it's never going to be straight again. It's got a little dog leg in it, or it breaks off, and then you either have to buy a part, you have to fix the part. And fixing the part it's not a big ordeal. It's just making one or reattaching it, but it's not going to look the same because you have to buff and lacquer it and all kinds of things. But as far as octave mechanism, I like to start with the travel of the actual lever. See how high it wants to rest, and then how far it has to travel. What's stopping it from traveling? Is a cork, or is it the opening of the octave mechanism itself stopping that from traveling? And that will depend on the make of instrument you have. Between the neck octave key, so the key that lies on the neck, and the octave stem, it is my belief that there needs to be a little bit of play between the two. That way you can move your neck from side to side this way, and it'll still actuate and function properly. Usually what I find in the shop is if the neck octave key is resting on the stem, that when you actuate the key and then hit your G key, your third finger, that neck octave key is going to stay up, and it's not going to close like it should. And that's another thing that you can fix. You can do a couple different things. You can hold down on the neck with the octave key in your hand, and then kind of gently pry against the little opening around the neck tenon, and try to flex it backward, flex it upward. So basically, if you think of the pad part, how it goes forward and curls under through the neck and has that little opening yoke thing, you're closing that distance. Or if it's hanging open when you've got your octave and your G key actuated. Now, if it's not opening at all, then you do the reverse. You open that opening. So the octave stem is hitting that key at a faster rate, or a shorter distance, I should say. And those are two things that I would do myself. That's exactly how to address that repair. Hold that key down against the pip, and then flex that key upward or downward in order to appropriate where it needs to be.
I also, it may not only be that, but also I've noticed that, some students will get a nice, airy buzz when they play an A above the staff, yep, due to the octave vent that's on the neck. And so in that octave vent, and my assessment is that the air rush that's happening and coming through that octave vent is actually hitting against the pad, and it's just when the octave vent is open, it's not lifting high enough. Am I accurate?
Right. Oh, you're exactly accurate. So there's not enough venting for the octave pip. So what you can do is flex that key outward in order for that octave, the neck octave key, to open further away from the octave pip. in order to try to alleviate that. Most cases, that's not going to fix it. Usually, it's a design error, or it's a bad mouthpiece reed horn combination, or it's one of the two.
Okay.
You might have heard of the pantyhose trick.
I have
You ever heard of
not.
that, Mark? Okay, well, I'm going to teach you something new. It's pretty cool.
Cool.
You take a piece of pantyhose from whomever, and you stretch it over the octave pip, and you kind of tie a bow around it. Just tie it on there, but make sure it's spread really thin, so you only see like the grid of the pantyhose over the octave pip.
Okay.
That will 90% of the time fix that hissing A.
Wow. All right.
I'll send you a link to it,
Okay.
or you can put in the show notes or something. But what you can do is take a step further, is have your repairman do it, and put some glue around the pip with the pantyhose on it, then cut the excess away, and that way you can't see the pantyhose tied around your neck, but you still have a little bit over the octave pip.
That's very cool. I love those little fixes. That's very good. You know what? Send me that link. I'd definitely like to look at that.
Sure.
Then the okay. So that's I think that covers kind of the only other thing with the octavent is I think most everybody should be aware that there's really two octavents. There's
Right.
a one on the neck, but there's also when you put down the G key and anything with that ring finger on the left hand down in the octavent, it opens up a secondary octavent that's further down in the tube, and located maybe just above where your thumb is resting, and when that happens, you're really relying on some type of mechanism that alternates, because it creates a different lever. If that's
Right.
not opening up all the way, or the octavent is there anything that they can do?
Generally, in my experience, if that's not opening all the way, there's one or two things happening. You have your neck octave key too closed, because that has to push against your octave stem in order to open that key. Either that's happening, or you've hit the instrument, you've hit the octave mechanism, running into a door or something on a chair, and you've bent that rod that actuates all those keys off of. And if you've bent that rod, you have to take it to your tech, have them take it all apart, straighten the rod, straighten the keys, reassemble it, and readjust everything. That's generally what I find happening between the two.
Cool. And it's just, I'm just going down the list, and so moving down the horn. Let's talk about the front F key. Because I think a lot of times on some of our instruments, I don't think people realize that the height of that front F key coming down can really affect whether that responds or not. I particularly like mine to be as open as possible, and I don't mind having to color it or voice it, because I just want it to work. But
do you have Selmer?
I do, yeah.
Okay, that explains it.
Yeah.
Okay, I generally find that Selmers need to be a little bit more open with that front F key. But more importantly to know is that front F key has to close your B key. And generally, if what I see come through the shop, if that fork F fingering is not working, it's because that key is not closing the B key all the way. So then you need to adjust that, because it'll close your upper stack bar and your B, and then allow it to be voiced, or to come out a little bit easier. As far as height of that key, generally I see that Selmers need to have a little bit more opening, and then Yamahas kind of have to be a little bit closed.
Okay.
I believe it was Rousseau, Eugene Rousseau said about the Yamahas, or about that fingering, that F pad, the palm F key, has to open the thickness of a business card in order to be appropriate. I believe that's what Rousseau said.
Wow.
So you'll see that on Yamahas, that they don't open a whole lot. They might open a little bit more than the thickness of a business card, but they don't really need to be open a whole lot.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So that's going to be a particular build and brand thing.
Build and brand, and also how you play. For instance, I have a customer. He's a really big jazz artist here in Indy, who wants his open smaller than the thickness of a business card, and he plays an old King Zephyr.
Okay.
So that's really hard to adjust. And he was just in the other day, and I had to replace that pad. I'm like, check out that key opening. He's like, you didn't change it, did you? I said, no, I didn't change it. So like, good. I liked it where it was. He was real particular, but he's a nice guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it just depends on the player too, because for him that worked in not opening so much.
Right.
I like to think of that fingering as another vent, another octave vent kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It just needs to be it's build and brand, and it's also the player.
Right.
I guess I shouldn't have said that all Yamahas have to be really small opening, because some people might need it to be open really wide. It just depends, but generally that's what I see with those kinds of horns.
Cool. And that's something I was not aware of, and the differences. That's really nice to hear. And so hopefully my students are listening. And if you have a Yamaha, any suggestions I may have made towards this in the past, you may want to rethink it. Okay. Very fair enough. And then working in, let's just talk about a general concept. I know that for me, I like to oil the connections of the rods, because I like when my saxophone's just moving right, and I just feel the loginess when it's just run out of oil, and so on those joints. So is there anything that you use or recommend that would be good?
I like a pretty thick oil for adding oil or just completely cleaning out your oil and adding new stuff. I like a pretty thick oil. The oil I specifically use is the Ultimac system, available from Music Medic.
Okay.
It's a synthetic oil. It's a really good oil. You can buy it in a couple different quantities, but they sell one just like in a pin oiler, and it's the high viscosity. It doesn't say thick or thin; it's high viscosity. I particularly like that whole system of lubricants because they mix with one another. I have the grease that comes in a syringe. And let's say I needed something thinner than the grease, but still thicker than the high viscosity oil. You can mix the two and get the right viscosity you want. It's totally great stuff, and it really clings to the metal very well. So it really seeps in there, but in your hinge tubes.
And it doesn't get everywhere, huh?
It doesn't get everywhere, but it lasts a while. It really does. You'll see a couple of repair techs who discourage you from adding oil to the joints of where the keys meet, and for very good reason. There's a particular repairman that I respect very much out in North Carolina that has a plethora of YouTube videos on saxophone topics, and a wonderful guy. Know him kind of well. Very much respect him, but he discourages you from adding oil because he likes to say that it mixes with the lint of your case and actually creates a lapping compound, which is basically liquid sandpaper.
Gotcha.
So however, he's one of those individuals who I mentioned before who does really custom overhauls, and there is no play between his keys on his hinge rods. So the only way to add oil to the horns he's fixed is to completely take it out, add it to the inside of the hinge rod, then put hinge tube, then add your hinge rod in.
Okay.
So it's a different kind of thing, and it makes complete sense. But I don't see, for a player's perspective, I don't see the initial harm of adding oil when you feel like your key needs oil, because sometimes your key is going to be clinky. For instance, your D key, your 6-finger, it's going to get clinky because it needs oil. Add some oil on the joints, work it in a little bit, and you'll see that sometimes that clink will go away.
Nice, and I do notice that
maintenance thing.
I also I like it a little bit on my rollers too, because they get a little noisy, and
they buzz.
They buzz a little bit, and I put a little oil on the connection of the rollers, and not only do they move nicely, but they also it kind of silences them.
Yeah, that high viscosity oil is really good for that, and that grease that comes in the syringe is good for that as well. Cool. And that's something you can do. It's just a little rod. As long as it's not stuck, you can get that rod out with a small screwdriver, put a little bit of that grease or oil on the inside of the roller, work it in with the rod, and reassemble it, and you're good to go.
Cool.
But if it's stuck, try not to mar or bang up the head of that screw, because if you do, your repairman's going to have to cut it out. And you're going to have to get both parts replaced and probably hear it from your repair tech.
and I think that goes to say anything on the saxophone, if you have to use force, an exceptional amount of force in order to, or even a reasonable amount of force to get something to go, it's like, just like anything, it's probably not good that you do it.
Just don't do it.
Don't do it.
Go talk to your repairman and say, hey, I tried to oil this. I tried to grease this just like you told me on this podcast, and it's not working. But I didn't want to break anything. I'm like, thank you for not breaking it. I really appreciate it. Because it just creates headaches for both parties involved. I don't want to have to cut a key out.
That's right.
I've done it before, and it's no fun because it's it can be very difficult to do it without you ever knowing. But sometimes there are file marks or saw marks that are left behind, and it's frustrating for those repair techs who just want to do good quality work. Yeah.
How about another thing is those little plastic tubes or whatever that make it help silence, like say your TC and TA keys, the trill keys on the side, in those arms that end up being in there, like. If you happen to lose those, I know it gets clanky, and that to your teacher, I'm sorry, if you've got a clanky horn, go to the repair shop immediately, because you are destroying your musicianship. But besides that, is there anything else that does to part of your ability to play the instrument?
It certainly does. As you mentioned, it messes with your musicianship, but it affects the key opening. So let's say you wanted to use your TC key. It's probably not the same sounding in tone, if you will, as your nbsp flat. Right. It's not going to be the same, and you want them to match as closely as possible. Inherently, they're not going to be exactly perfect, but you want them close. So a good fix for that is something that I actually get at Harbor Freight. And if you don't know what Harbor Freight is, it is kind of an economy tools provider, and they sell the nice assortment of heat shrink tubing. More importantly, they sell one that's glue lined. So it's got some hot glue lined in there. They usually use it for marine electronics. So you can get that little bundle. I think it's like $5, and it's more than you'll ever need. Slide the smallest one or the second smallest one on the stem of your key, cut it off with a pair of scissors, take your girlfriend or your own hair dryer, heat it up, shrink it, and you've fixed your problem.
That is beautiful. I know that helps somebody out there. Hopefully one of my students who has a clanky horn.
And that works well as your octave stem too. But if you put that on your octave stem, sometimes that vinyl coating is a little bit grippy, and it might not make your octave key work very well, very quickly. What you can do is take some cork grease, put on your finger, and rub that octave stem vinyl coating thing, heat shrink tubing, and kind of grease that up, and it'll fix it.
Cool. All these little tips and tricks. I'm enjoying this. All right. How about springs? I want to talk about springs because right now, like I always love it when a student's like, "It's not working," and it's just a spring that's undone that came out. And you're like, "All right, here, pop it back, kid."
I think a good investment for a saxophone is to have a spring hook in your saxophone. They're relatively inexpensive. You don't have to be a repair technician to get one. There are a number of retailers that sell them in a couple different sizes. A large one would be just fine for a saxophone. I think the small one would be a little bit too small in some instances. But if you see a spring unhooked, you just have to grip it with your spring hook and push it back into place as delicately as you can. And if it takes you a couple tries, that's okay.
Yeah.
Generally, if it came off while your horn's assembled, it will go back on when your horn's assembled. Very rarely are there a couple of springs that have to be engaged while you're reassembling an instrument.
Okay.
And if that happens, I would suggest you not do it yourself, because what will happen sometimes is you will slip off that spring because either you're hitting it from a different angle or you're on the tapered portion of your blued needle spring. You'll slip and actually hit your horn and scratch it.
Right.
And I'd hate for you to do that to your own horn.
Yeah. And you know, like, I know this on a clip, I didn't have that hook, and I had to use a nice, one of my keys in order to get in there and do it. And lo and behold, there's the scratch. And, and that's certainly part of it. I think, from my standpoint, I think you're right. Getting that hook is definitely a wise investment, and
especially as a teacher, you'll use it more than you think you will.
I agree.
And what you could also use is a small crochet hook. If you're going to pull a spring,
there you go.
You could use so if you've got one of those laying around. I've been known to use a popsicle stick because it has just enough give at the end of it to grip the spring where I can manipulate it over the spring cradle and get it going.
Gotcha. And in that, the springs, they control the tension of the rebound in what, when you release the key, where it goes back, or when the resistance when you're putting the key down. And
right.
So, now I know that I have, when I'm not happy with a certain adjustment, I've gone ahead and taken that spring hook and adjusted my tension a little bit for a couple of keys, just on my own. But is there anything dangerous about that, or anything that we need to watch out for? Because I've broken a spring before doing it too.
There's a danger in a couple of keys, particularly the G sharp and the C sharp keys. Those keys are interesting because there's the key that actually is associated with that note, and then a lever that closes that key. So let's talk about the G sharp. We have the lever, the part that your finger sits on, and then you've got the key on the adjacent side of the body. And the force that closes that key is the spring tension of the lever. That lever needs to have a stronger force than the actual G-sharp key spring. For instance, what I see sometimes is that when you hit your G-sharp key opens. If it doesn't stick, and it will bounce against its own lever. That tells me that the spring on the G-sharp key is a little bit too weak, because it's kind of bouncing and it's rebounding. It doesn't have enough force to keep it firmly against the G-sharp lever.
Right.
That's dangerous because you could over-adjust that G-sharp key spring, and your lever doesn't have enough force to close it all the way.
That's basically what I was looking for in it. I think I wouldn't. Coming from a teacher's perspective, I wouldn't advise any of my middle school or high school students to mess with the springs at all, or try to deal with that. But I definitely in those areas, I think those are the kind of things that the fine tuning of the tension that you need to be sitting with your repair tech and making sure that it's there. Some of the adjustments I've had to make are, of course, on the clip, and when I'm up against time and I just need to get it done, and it's just not comfortable. It's not hitting right. So, cool. Okay, so that's good for the springs. And
can I say a couple more things about springs?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Sure. If they're rusty, that doesn't mean they need to be replaced. Sometimes that the blued. They call them blued because they're heat tempered to where they're not supposed to rust.
Okay.
Sometimes they're not really heat tempered, so they're not supposed to rust. They're just a steel spring, and they're susceptible to rust. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to be replaced. That being said, if you have a nice vintage horn and you have rusted springs, these springs are 7 years old to begin with. When they got rust on them, they're probably a little bit weak, and you might have to replace them. But generally, for a newer horn, if they have rust on them, it's not a big deal. Don't freak out. I've had a number of students come in and say, I need to have all my springs replaced. They're all rusty. I'm like, no, it's okay. Let me clean the rust off. Let me, retension them. Let me look at them. They're just fine. It doesn't warrant the expensive and time laborious job to take them all out, recut them, reinstall them. And it's that can be a nightmare, but it can be done for the right amount of money.
Well, of course.
Right.
Well, of course. and would you say that the spring, like replacing the springs like that would be more overhaul than repad?
It can be associated in a repad. For instance, if I had a broken spring or a weak spring that I thought, well, this is not going to last a year or two, I'll go ahead and replace it in a repad. That's no problem. I already have the instrument apart. But generally, in an overhaul, you would have the majority of your springs replaced.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And that's something you can ask your tech. Like if you want to get an overhaul, really ask them what that means to them, because that could mean the exact same things as a repad, and they call it an overhaul.
Right.
When I think, and again, this is my personal opinion, I think there needs to be a more finite definition between the two services, so everyone knows what they're getting.
Right. And that's something that everybody can ask.
Right. Just
tech.
ask your practitioner. Just what do they associate a repad or overhaul with, and they'll tell you. They'll be happy to tell you. Most of the information that repair techs will give you, they're happy to give. They want to talk about their craft, especially with someone who's interested in what they do.
Cool. I think, and they are usually. I mean, my gosh, you get them going just like what we're doing right now, and we're just talk. And okay, I want to cover. I think one more component that I think would be really good to talk about is the body of the saxophone, and when it in concerns of like minor denting or major denting or kind of. I'm not really talking about a massive drop. I mean, obviously you need a repairman at that point. But what concerns are if you've got some dings, and then even talk about lacquer issues and something along those lines, things that relate to the body.
Sure. It's just cover dents. Dents usually stretches the brass, meaning that if, let's say, under the palm D key, the foot usually hits the tube and not a flange, so not a secondary piece of brass, but usually the tube. I see on a lot of student horns that they're missing their bumper, their piece of cork, and they just wail on that palm D key and they put a dent in it, a pretty sizable dent, and that can be remedied. It doesn't affect how the horn plays. It just affects how that particular key opens, because it's opening farther than it needs to. Mm-hmm. But when I say stretched is, I can only push that dent out to a certain point to where it looks like a bulge, so it might sometimes look worse. So it's think of it this way: I can't iron that brass to how it originally was from the factory, because that portion of brass has stretched. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so I can't put it back, make it look 100% perfect. And sometimes with dents like that, or even larger dents, let's say on the bow of your instrument, so where the tube turns into the bell, the bow, if you have, let's say, a baritone saxophone, which happens a lot, you get a nice big dent to where you can stand it up on its end and it'll sit there, nice big flat spot. That dent has stretched that brass a lot, and it has created a nodal dead spot. So when, for instance, let's say you take a sheet of brass and you want to flip it, or you want to, let's say you have an 8.5 by 11 sheet of brass and you want to fold it hot dog style, so long ways. You can fold it back and forth, then it's eventually going to get really hard to, so that's called work hardening. That brass has gotten really hard and it does not want to vibrate anymore. And then if you keep doing it, that brass is going to snap in half because it's gotten so brittle and so hard that it just snaps in half. So on these large dents, let's say on a bow of a saxophone, they can be taken out, sometimes more evasively than others. Sometimes it requires unsoldering the guard and then taking your magnets or your dent balls and really burnishing, getting all those dents out, making it nice and round again, then resolder your guard. I'll get to the lacquer here in a moment, but anyway, you've created a nodal dead spot. So that part of the brass of the horn, it's not going to vibrate how it used to because it's gotten hard. It's gotten stretched. Then you made it harder by trying to get the dent out, and then it's back. It looks pretty close, but it's not perfect. It's stretched, and it's a nodal dead spot on the instrument. Granted, it's not that big of a deal, that low on the instrument, but it still will affect those people looking for that 100% out of their instrument.
Right. And so let's go the opposite end. What if you've got a dent in your neck?
Ooh, dents and necks are tough because we have a ventura in our neck. Now, a ventura is where the taper of your neck gets closed before it gets open again into the saxophone. So let's say the opening diameter of your neck is 1/2 inch, for argument's sake. Then let's say 2.5 inches down the pipe, it gets to, what's it called? 7/16 of an inch. So it's got a 1/16 of an inch smaller over those 2.5 inches. And then it flares back out into the instrument. All really good necks have some kind of ventura, a point where it gets smaller and then it gets larger again. And that controls a lot of how well it plays, how free-blowing it is, and things of that nature. Basically, kind of defines the taper of your instrument and the quality of neck. I know that some of the major manufacturers have different kinds of necks with different tapers.
Right.
They're really just putting that ventura point at different spots.
Okay.
But in regards to dents, it's really hard to get a dent out. One, because it's stretched, and two, you want it to play like it did before. And if you have to push that dent out, sometimes, depending on the quality of brass and the thickness of the brass, you're going to stretch it and make a bulge, or you're not going to make that much of a difference at all.
Right.
Generally, for really good pro-line necks, I will tell my customers that I can get it as close as I can, but I'm going to try not to bulge it, because if you bulge it, you're creating a nodal dead spot, and you're kind of dead in that part of the instrument.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
Yeah, and so so basically,
be careful.
Be careful, because yeah, and that's I've had a neck on a tenor where it got tweaked to where
it pulled down,
and then it actually folded the metal.
Ooh.
Oh man, that neck is gone.
Yeah, I can believe it.
I just bought another one. There was no.
Well, that's probably the cheaper way too.
Yeah, that's what my repair guy said. I said, I got two things for you: buy a new one, or I'm gonna spend a lot of hours trying to get this right.
Yeah.
And
well, if you get a pull down on a tenor neck, for instance, it is not wise. And I say this because there's a couple of YouTube videos out there that advise you to straighten that neck in your instrument, in the actual, in your receiver, and hold the receiver and push up on the neck until you straighten it out. That is not the way it should be repaired, for a couple of reasons. One, it's not very controlled. You have very little control of how hard you're actually pushing. Two, you'll end up ovaling the neck tenon and neck receiver. And if you oval it, you're not really helping yourself at all. You're creating more of an issue. You just
described exactly what happened. So
it's a big issue. So what you need to do is have your tech put it in let me talk about how I would address it. I would put it in a neck swedging tool or neck shrinking tool. Then I would put my neck expanding tool in it as well, so it's reinforced from the outside of the tenon and the inside of the tenon. Yeah, to keep it as cylindrical as possible. Then I would do my best to try to straighten out the neck in various different ways in black magic. And then I would refit your neck. I would refit how your neck tenon mates with your neck receiver and the potential air loss of that joint.
Right.
It's an expensive job, but on a good quality instrument, it's what needs to be done.
And basically, like we said before, be careful. And
right, be careful.
And so I think, good. The only other, I think the last thing I had mentioned lacquer. Should we have it relacquered? Shouldn't we have it relacquered?
Well, working in a shop, I can see the benefit of either process. So if you want to have a horn relacquered, it's probably because you have this really old horn. It's a nice horn, let's say a Busher 400 top hat and cane. Really nice horn. It deserves to look pretty when you can. And you could have it relacquered, and then it'll look pretty. It won't be the original lacquer because you can't match lacquer. And it'll look nice, and someone will probably scoff at it, saying, "Oh, it's been relacquered. Oh, too bad." I think to answer your question, Mark, it's up to you if you want to have it relacquered or not. Basically, if you want to have it looking nice and don't really care about the resellability of it, what have you. But if you're going to relacquer it, let's just discuss the process of it real quick. There are two ways of taking off the old lacquer. You can take it off chemically, or you can take it off with an abrasive, such as a buffing wheel or a sanding disc, or a sanding belt, I should say. The latter is not really the choice, because the lacquer is, I think, a couple microns thick. It's not very thick at all.
Right.
So if you use an abrasive like that, you can go too far too quick.
Right.
There are stripping agents that you can use that'll take it right off. Usually hot water takes it right off anyway. It loosens it and it comes right off in hot water.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty delicate stuff, especially the old stuff. It doesn't want to come off. It wants to come off pretty easily in hot water. There's a lot of discussion out there about it changes the sound if you take all the lacquer off or you have it relacquered. I don't know if I personally buy into all that. I think there's more to the process of relacquering than just stripping the lacquer and shining it up and putting new lacquer on. Because when you're relacquering, you're buffing the surface, you're buffing the brass, and your buffing removes material. You definitely will change how it plays, whether it's better or worse, who knows. But let's say you have this nice old Mark VI that it's got half the lacquer on it just because it's a workhorse of horn, and you want to go the extra mile and take the rest of it off. You can either wait for it to decay naturally, or you can have your tech strip it as much as you want. You can strip it all if you want. Is it worth the money, the time, the possible resellability of your instrument? That's up for you to decide. Me personally, I'd keep my horn as pristine as I could because I like it. It's pretty, and I don't know if I'd ever want to change it. But there might be a day where I might want it. It might not look pretty anymore. I might have to pay someone to relacquer it for me. And I also think it depends on who does it too, because there are techs who are very conscious about, okay, I need to take off as little material as possible. I really need to take my time and go really slow in the buffing wheel to make sure we don't knock off the levelness of the tone holes, make sure we're not missing any of the lacquer or trying to make it as shiny as possible. There are so many variables to consider when talking about relacquering. Generally, I see people wanting to get it off, like on an old 6 or something, just take the lacquer off just to get it all done, or just because they see that or they've read somewhere that it changes how it plays. Mm-hmm. But I think it just depends on the individual and what you want to get out of it. Is it worth the time? Is it worth the money? Things like that.
Good answer. And for me, I do play on Summers, Series 2, Series 3. and I've just, it's just, none of the lacquer's worn off. It's been nice. I mean, it's just mostly been because I just take care of it. And I think that's, and as you said, it's like the acidity of your hands, and that can play into it. And I don't know. I got to tell you, anybody that, from my opinion, I think anybody that's had some wear and tear, wear it as a badge of honor. You've officially worn some weathering into your instrument, and congratulations.
It's more of your horn then.
It's more of your horn. There it is.
Yeah, I've got customers who they're so acidic in their chemistry that they actually wear through their pearls really badly to the brass. I have one individual in particular who just wears through his pearls, and he doesn't want me to replace them because he's just going to have to replace them again. But it fits his hand really well.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to do that. Yeah, I mean, I don't blame him at all.
Right?
It might, the rest of the brass around it's kind of decaying as well, but man, it's his horn.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but let me say a couple more things about lacquer, though.
Go ahead.
There are a couple of discrepancies that lacquer is what makes it shiny, and it's not. It's the steps of buffing, using a hard buff and using a soft buff in order to so basically buffing is removing scratches. So when you put a solder joint together, if you have to sand a portion to get the old solder off, you might have some sanding marks. Then you use the hard buff. It's a little more aggressive. Uses a different kind of compound to really smooth out your scratches. And then the soft buff removes some of those scratches. It makes a mirror finish. But the lacquer is there to protect that finish of the brass. So the shiny part is the brass. It's not the lacquer. The lacquer just keeps it shiny. And I get a couple of students who ask me, well, I want to get this re-lacquered because I want it to be shiny again. Well, that's not going to make it shiny. That's going to keep it shiny.
Right.
So I wanted to throw that out there to someone who might be confused about it.
That's good. That'll help. That'll help somebody out there for sure. And I think I mean, this is the teacher in me, is like, everybody should be 99% more concerned about how it plays and how it feels while you play than what it looks like. Because in a lot of ways, that look of the horn, hey, look, if you're a pro out there and that look is particular to what you have to do, you are in a very particular situation. And I'm sure there is some company that is helping you with that situation. And if not, help them, company. and that's where I feel like, it's kind of like, sometimes we want that to be, if we're working on our way to that type of being in that spot. I think a lot of times we may cause ourselves a little more monetary hurt than necessary. And yeah.
Well, on the flip side, Mark, let's say you're looking for a new horn and you find one that plays so well, but it kind of doesn't look like the greatest thing in the world. Who cares? It's a great playing horn. It might not look pretty, but you're probably going to get a good price on it because it doesn't look exactly the prettiest horn out there. Because a lot of stores will price their horns, saxophones in particular, based on how they look, not necessarily how they play, because it's gonna play differently for every player. So the only objective thing they can do is base it on how it looks and its merit that it's gained through the masses.
I like that. And again, I mean, how it plays, how it sounds, and how it feels is so critical to any of it. And then that's what becomes personal to you. I mean, look, I mentioned my horns I play on, but they are very personal to me. I mean, I've been playing on them for over 20 years, those horns, and they are personal. They are my instruments at this point. And I play other horns and I'm like, wow, I like this about that horn, but I still like my horns. It doesn't feel like home. And I like having what I know to expect. So, okay, enough about that. I actually just, I'm just looking at the time and I'm going, we've had a really good, thorough discussion, I believe. And it's going to provoke some people to just take care of their instrument a little bit more, but also hopefully everybody has a little bit more encouragement to go and engage with their repairmen, and also maybe a few tips and tricks they can do to help themselves out in the way. And you've really helped us out, Stephen, and really appreciate it. Do you happen to have where anybody could reach you for questions, or even if they happen to be in your area, where they could reach you for some a look at their saxophone?
Sure. You can find me on Facebook, Stephen Georges, guy with a beard. I think it's a pretty easy way to find me. I work at Musicians Repair and Sales in downtown Indianapolis. You can find me there anytime. I'm there all the time. Like I said, I've been pretty busy this winter season. But if you want to shoot me an email, my email is saxgeorges@gmail.com.
Awesome. And folks, you can reach me at themodernsaxophonist@gmail.com. Again, themodernsaxophonist@gmail.com. You can tweet me and follow at The Modern Sax. You can like our page, The Modern Saxophonist Podcast on Facebook. And I did notice there was someone that wrote on our YouTube page that they were having trouble with the Facebook. Hey, we've experimented with a couple of different Facebook groups, and so just make sure you like the one that's the radio station one. That's where we generally post and do everything. And then other than that, you can go to our website, www.themodernsaxophonist.com, of course. And so, hey, I'm Mark, and this is Stephen. And Stephen, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Definitely enlightened on some what's going on with the sax, and I got to tell you, folks, it's definitely time to get practicing. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Modern Saxophonist Podcast. You can find us at www.themodernsaxophonist.com. We're also on Twitter @themodernsax.